He just wanted to eat good food without worrying about his health. Now he's in another world, inside the body of an invincible vampire. No weaknesses, no limits, and now he's the mayor of a ruined village. With overwhelming power and a peaceful dream from the previous owner, can he rebuild this land and unite humans and vampires? Let's find out. This is a story about the strongest vampire, Sato Ryuto. Vampires have the ability to regenerate, can change shape, and use magic. An immortal monster that everyone fears, but he has many weaknesses: sunlight, garlic, holy ashes. The list can go on and on. A man asked the vampire towering over him, "Who is he? Why doesn't holy water work?" The vampire asked in response, "Who is he?" Not long before, the protagonist was at home, carefully studying the test results, and said he can't believe that he failed to pass normally. Then he fell into a chair and began to complain. A bachelor, terrible salary, stress from work, health problems due to age. When was the last time he ate something tasty? He wants to at least eat normal food. Meanwhile, a voice was heard that said he found him, the one who desires strength. The protagonist was surprised. What kind of strange voice? Later, he continued to tell him to open his eyes, to wake up. The protagonist opened his eyes, saw that he was in a cave, and screamed in fear. "What is it? What? Where is he?" he said. Finally, he woke up, the one who will fulfill his wish. MC grabbed his head and screamed, "Who is he?" The voice continued. It took over his body and became a vampire. The protagonist was very surprised by what was happening. The vampire introduced himself. His name is Cesard. Then he apologized, but he does not have much time. Let him try to get used to the body first. The protagonist tried to run, accelerated greatly, and screamed, "How fast!" He runs at the speed of a car. Then he jumped up and jumped out of the cave and screamed, "Exit." Then he saw the bright sun and screamed, "How bright!" Then he flew down, closed his eyes, and thought that it was time to say goodbye. Cesard said that you should not underestimate the vampire's body. MC landed on the ground and was surprised. He is alive? Not a scratch on him. Cesard continued that this is not all. Suddenly, wings grew behind the protagonist. He jumped again, then saw a flying dragon and shouted enthusiastically, "Seriously? Is that a dragon?" He said, "Okay." He figured that out. Then the protagonist wanted to spread his wings, but he couldn't, and he flew down and shouted, "Can vampires really fall from such a height? Look at his strong body." Cesard replied that it wasn't strong and would crush him. The protagonist shouted, "Wings? How should you flap your wings?" Cesard said that he shouldn't even try. His soul hadn't gained full control over his body yet. MC shouted in fear that the ground was close. He mentally said goodbye to life and fell to the ground. Then Cesar said that he was still alive, so he could open his eyes. The protagonist opened his eyes, stood up, stretched out his arms, and looked at himself in surprise. Cesar said he showed him the vampire's ability to regenerate. This is the body he was looking for. With this, he will never get sick. The protagonist folded his arms across his chest and said in displeasure, "You could have just said it and not shown it." Cesard apologized. Then the protagonist said that he shouldn't be angry, but in the future, so that he could do without extreme sports. Cesard agreed. "Okay, they'll continue." MC asked to wait a minute. Then he asked why he became a vampire at all. Cesard answered, he summoned his soul with summoning magic, and it occupied his body. The protagonist raised his hand and said in surprise, "Is he the chosen hero?" Cesard didn't agree and said he just happened to be one of the first. That is, he matched all his criteria. The protagonist thought about it and asked what criteria. Cesard started listing. He was one of those who sat up late at night, didn't eat much, and limited himself to simple food. MC thought so he was talking about his lifestyle. Cesar continued. He was very sorry that he dragged him into all this because of his selfish desire. As an apology, he would tell everything about himself, and when he was no longer in this body, he could do whatever he wanted with it. He had to watch carefully. He had returned to that time. The girl raised her hand and said, "Welcome back, Cesar." He took her hand and she continued that he had made a promise. After that, they hugged, and she said that she loved him and that they would stay together forever. Time passed and he finally revealed his true nature. The priest raised his hand with the cross up and shouted, "Filthy vampire." She started crying, covering her face with her hands, and said, "Why didn't he tell her that he is a vampire?" Then he shouted, he will not forgive her for spitting on his feelings. He will never forgive her. Ryuto had tears streaming down his cheeks. Caesar said, the memory of the one he loved, he knows it's selfish, but could he grant his wish? He wants people and vampires to live in peace. Now he has a vampire body and a human soul. He can. The main character continued to cry and thought that for this he went so far, even ready to disappear forever? So he became a vampire. Sometime later, at night in a cave, Eri, frightened, pressed herself against the wall, where she was driven by a pack of hungry wolves. She cried and asked what to do. A little earlier, MC was sitting on the floor, eating meat, next to the corpse of an animal he killed. He said that he can eat raw meat, but cooked is tastier, and thought, however, he is not going to die of hunger. 3 weeks have passed since his reincarnation. He was able to adapt to the world where magic and monsters exist. He bit off a piece of meat, closed his eyes and continued, By the way, he will not be able to return to the old world. At first, he was upset, but quickly resigned himself. He thought that vampires only drink blood, but they can eat meat, fruits, and vegetables. In addition, in this body, he can even eat raw meat and hunt quite easily. Then he smiled, spread his arms in different directions, and added that this transformation, on the contrary, made him feel better. No longer need to sit in the body of an adult depressive man, and also stress at work. He no longer needs to think about it. He does not need to worry about the diet either. He has a perfect body. The main character folded his hands near his face and thanked him for everything. But somehow, we need to reconcile people and vampires. In the meantime, he closed his eyes, grabbed his head with his hands, and continued. When he began to understand this, he learned from ISEKAI'D's memories that people do not have the best relationship with vampires. He learned that people consider vampires to be real predators, so the reaction is logical. After that, he spun around the floor in different directions, holding his head with his hands, screaming. How can he even achieve peace between people and vampires in such a situation? There is another reason. He closed his eyes and thought that the taste of the food is not very good. MC started to beat his fists on the floor and shout that simple cooking won't change much. If only there were some spices. To get it, you need to make friends with people. Then he imagined delicious food, started to stretch his hands forward and ask. But then he came to his senses and realized that he couldn't satisfy his inner gourmet yet. He thought that he could sense wild animals and also a person. Then he got up and thought that he had sensed a person in the forest for the first time. The protagonist said that he didn't know what was going on there, but he needed help and quickly ran forward. With sharp blows of his hands, he killed and scattered the corpses of several wolves in different directions. The rest managed to get away from there. Then he raised his hand and said that he probably overdid it. The protagonist looked at the girl and thought, did he scare her? Wow, surprisingly, she's calm? The protagonist came closer to her and asked what happened. Was she lost? She said that her name was Eerie and she needed his help. He looked at her questioningly and they headed towards the exit. Then he asked, isn't she afraid of him? Hasn't she heard what they say about people like him? Eerie answered, she knows everything. She came to him especially. Then she extended her hand forward and told him to look there. There was a fire in the distance, and continued that the village was attacked by bandits. Then she handed him coins and asked him to help her. In exchange, she would give him this money, as well as her body. She was even ready to pay with her blood. So, he was surprised and thought, is this girl ready to go that far? He smiled, showing his fangs, and said that she was serious, even ready to give all her blood. But he didn't need all of it. A glass would be enough. She asked, a vampire who didn't need blood? He was strange. He answered that he was just tired of the same taste, but to be honest, he would like something tastier. Irie affirmatively said that he was definitely strange. The protagonist continued, okay, he will go to the village to save. He thought, besides, this is a great opportunity, because for saving he can ask for salt. He doubts that people will hate their savior, even if it is a vampire. Besides, he must fulfill ISEKAI'D's last wishes. The protagonist extended his hand to the girl and said, okay, they have to go. Meanwhile, in the village, robbers were setting houses on fire, killing residents. People were running in different directions. One of the residents, trying to dodge, shouted for him not to come closer. One of the robbers, holding a torch in his hands, shouted for them to kill old people and men. They take women alive. At this time, the robber hit the man in the back with his sword. He screamed and fell. A woman running away with a child in her arms turned around and screamed, darling. A robber put his foot on the man's back and asked, is he her husband? She would try to run away and he would kill him. The man screamed for her not to worry about him. The robber stepped on the man's head with his boot and screamed loudly for him to shut up. The woman fell in front of him and fearfully asked him to stop and not to kill her husband. The robber looked at her body and in a satisfied voice told her to stop running and take her clothes off so he could taste her. She did not agree. He said that if she resisted, he would kill him. She got scared and screamed that she would do whatever he wanted. But no, she did not have time to finish. The robber looked at her carefully and said he took a closer look and saw how scary she was. Then he pointed the bloody sword at her and continued, he can't do anything because she is so ugly he will kill her husband. She screamed for him to stop. He answered, what did she expect? Suffering is a part of married life. Then he swung his sword and continued, but in fact, he is even kind. At least before he dies, he will not see how his wife is defamed. The robber screamed for him to die. He swung his sword. At the same moment, he himself was hit from behind. The robber's head fell next to the woman. She was very scared and shook. MC leaned over to her, extended his hand and asked, is she okay? She looked at him and screamed in fear, monster. He should not come near her. One villager saw him and asked, what the hell? Another added, is he a vampire? The third was surprised. Oh shit, what is he doing here? Then people began to scream, vampire. We must run away quickly. The protagonist thought, but considering that he is a monster that feeds on human blood, the reaction is quite adequate. The robbers looked at the vampire and one of them asked, who is this? One of the locals? Another added, did he decide to interfere with them? MC thought, first we need to deal with the bandits. Then he raised his hand, looked at it and thought, oh yeah, he killed a man and didn't even blink an eye. Surprisingly, he is calm. This is because of the vampire instincts. People are prey for a vampire, so he does not feel anything. One of the robbers said in surprise, what? Same, but did not have time to finish. He raised his hand up, concentrated clots of blood above himself, and then smiling used the blood rain attack. In the next second, drops of blood quickly flew from the main clot. The thieves looked at this in fear, tried to dodge, but the blood rain hit them. He thought, it is better not to kill anyone further, otherwise the locals will be too afraid. At this time, people heard a sound, and one of them said, what was that sound? Another added, someone used magic? Reed suggested, maybe it was the soldiers of the local lord? Bill turned around and replied, that's impossible. They bartered this territory. He let them rob it. The protagonist thought in surprise, oh what? Then he walked up to the protagonist and continued, who is he? The protagonist answered, Ryuto Sato, and at that very moment he realized that he couldn't use his previous name. Nick told him to stop. Bill shouted in surprise, boss! He looked at the protagonist, who was throwing up a bloody ball with his hand, and said, magic speaks for itself. It's a vampire. Then he poured water on his axe and said, fortunately, they have holy water with them. Then he swung and shouted, low-ranking vampire. He shouldn't show off, he should die. He hit the protagonist in the neck with an axe. The protagonist grabbed his neck with his hands and began to make terrible sounds. Nick screamed, he will not recover from such a wound. Vampires, they have the ability to regenerate, can change shape and use magic. An immortal monster that everyone fears, but he has many weaknesses. Sunlight, garlic, holy ashes. The list can go on and on. At that moment, MC hit his neck with an axe, and his head flew off, falling next to Irie. Nick screamed in surprise, did he kill himself? Then he raised his hand and smiling, said he could not stand the pain of holy water. What an idiot. The protagonist said that he guessed wrong. Meanwhile, the protagonist's head was back in place, and he continued, it was faster than bleeding out. He will recover faster. Nick was very surprised and said, holy water did not work. Who is he? And he fell to the ground. He came closer to him and asked who he was. Here he began to remember how Cesard told him to listen carefully, Ryuto. The soul of a vampire has an elemental allegiance. Like an evil spirit, the body itself is just a vessel. The most important thing in a vampire's body is the soul. Vampires die from all this, garlic, holy water, an aspen stake, a cross, only because their soul is purified. He thought, but if a vampire's body has a human soul, the weakness of their soul will be nullified. Then he said to excuse him, but he is not a low-ranking vampire. He is not even a completely ordinary vampire. Not only is he a very strong vampire, but he also has a human soul. He is a vampire who has no weaknesses. Nick said in surprise, he is literally the strongest monster? He will not die, no matter how they try to kill him. A strength that surpasses that of a human, and also colossal magical power. They simply have no chance. The protagonist then used the blood rain spell, attacking Nick. He thanked him for the explanation. Then he took Nick by the belt and said, here, he returns, and threw it into the crowd. He shouted, boss. The robbers picked up Nick and ran away shouting, he is simply invincible. He shouted that he cannot die here. Later, the protagonist put his hand to his face and thought, he mentioned something interesting. They traded this territory. He let them rob it. Then he went forward, saw the villagers and said, so. They began to ask him to save them. Meanwhile, Irie came up, pointed her hand at the protagonist, and told them not to worry. She was the one who brought him. According to rumors, a vampire lived deep in the forest. The village elder asked in surprise, Irie? But why? At this point, MC interrupted him and said, they will talk later. First, they need to heal the wounded. He saw a woman sitting next to a wounded child. He leaned over the child, asked for forgiveness and said, it's terrible. If nothing is done, he will die from blood loss. He can't use healing magic, so it may hurt, but he put his hand to the wound on the child's body and used wound closure magic, thereby healing him. She thanked him. He added, this is not healing magic, so there will be a scar. Still better than him dying. Then he turned to the people and told them to let them know if there are any more wounded. He will help those who can still be saved, and began to examine the people. Then he went, saw fire, turned around and said, next we need to put out the fire. It would be better to destroy the burning houses. That way the fire will not spread further. The elder replied that he does not mind, but then MC said okay, and took a deep breath and exhaled with all his might. The flow was very strong. People tried to dodge it. He put out the fire, and the villagers said, what kind of person could defeat him? This is some kind of nonsense. In the meantime, Irie approached the protagonist and thanked him. He replied, no need to thank. They can help him too. She asked, help? The protagonist turned and called elder. He said he was listening. The protagonist continued, those bandits said that they were allowed to attack the village. What does he think about this? The elder replied that he had previously asked the Lord to deal with the bandits, but he did nothing. Such large gangs were usually immediately exterminated by the army. They pay taxes to the Lord, and he must protect them. MC lowered his hand and said, but the bandits attacked them. This means that their lord decided to abandon them. The elder was very surprised by these words. MC continued, if this is true, then their village will be attacked again, and if they want to escape, it is not a fact that they will last long, so they are doomed. Then he raised his hand, extended 3 fingers and said, well, there is a third option. He, a vampire, who will protect their village instead of the Lord. Closing his eyes, he thought, this is it, the first step to peace. And in this village he can eat a lot of different delicacies. The elder asked, a vampire will protect a human village? He just wants to drink their blood. The protagonist raised his hand and said, not quite, he will drink blood, but not in lethal doses. The elder looked at him and continued, it was all too suspicious. What is he trying to achieve? The protagonist, smiling, replied, I don't just need their blood, he's a cooking fan. He needs proper food. The elder chuckled, he's going to cook them? The protagonist took him by the shoulders with his hands, and looking him in the face, said that he was wrong, he needed normal food. The elder continued laughing, and he began to list that he could start with spices, cinnamon, sugar, salt. The elder said in surprise, really, and added that he needed to discuss this with the locals. Ryuto spread his hands and said, of course, he'll give them time to think. Airi came up and said that she wanted to ask him something. Why should he protect them at all? He answered, there are 2 reasons. The first is that he needs tasty food. She looked at him with disappointment and said how petty he was, thus hurting his pride. Then she continued, okay, what about the second reason? He answered that she should stop looking at him with such disappointment. Then he said, the second is a promise he made to someone. Then he took a book out of his pocket, handed it over and continued, a world where vampires and humans will coexist. And it turned out that he can achieve both of these goals if he protects them. That's it. Now she will not look at him with such disappointment. In the meantime, they moved on and continued their conversation. She said how naive he was, he should try to grow up a little. He got angry and shouted, this is not even his desire, another vampire. She answered, it is impossible. Vampires have hunted humans all their lives. They will not be able to coexist. He added, does she mean to say that there is no chance? She added, let's see how things go. We will try. He added how quickly her opinion changes. Then they saw the villagers ahead of them, loudly discussing something. They stopped, and he asked if she wanted to join them to the discussion. She replied that she was a stranger in this village, having left it. She didn't even have the right to vote. MC was surprised and said, but at the same time she wanted to save them. Is he the weird one? She answered sharply that she didn't want to hear anything from a vampire with such dreams. At that time, an elder walked towards them. The protagonist asked, have they made a decision? The elder said that they were asking him to protect them. They would obey him. He smiled and said, great. He, Rito Sato, would protect their village. He was the new lord of the village. He looked around and said that they needed to start rebuilding the village. First, they needed to get rid of the rubble. They could collect wood from the forest. He thought about it. And so, the first step towards coexistence between the first and the people had been made. Then he ran towards the forest. She followed him. He turned and asked why she was following him. The forest was dangerous. There were a lot of monsters. She replied that as long as he was around, she was safe. He added that she was right. But wasn't she afraid of him? She said, how can I put it, that's just his character. She wasn't afraid of him. He got angry and shouted, what's wrong with his character? Later, they stopped in a clearing in the forest. He said, okay, he'll go here. She asked what he was going to do. He brought his hand to his mouth, bit his finger and told her to move away a little. Then he stretched out his hand. Blood started coming out of his finger. He held a book in his other hand, and he started telling them to hear his call, to answer it, to go beyond the boundaries of this world. She looked at it in surprise. He continued, to make them appear from a drop of his blood. At that time, a lot of light appeared on the ground, and unknown animals began to emerge from the pool of blood. He introduced them. The bat is Colorin, the mole is Morgan, the butterfly is Gus. They shouted, Master Ryuto. They were waiting for his call. They just found what he was looking for. Airi asked, what is this? The protagonist smiled and answered, these are his minions. Then he saw the mole rolling something and asked, what does he have there, Morgan? The mole answered, potatoes, very tasty if fried. The protagonist said, with a quick glance, he noticed that they clearly had problems with food in their village. They will start by growing potatoes in the fields. Later, they will take up other vegetables. She asked in surprise, will they have a lot of food? He smiled, showing his fangs, and answered, of course they will. The protagonist continued, with his beautiful minions, anything is possible. The minions looked at them and shouted, they will help Master Ryuto. There is no one better than them. Airi approached Morgan and told him to listen. Morgan asked, what is it, Lady Airi? She turned to the protagonist and said that he should give them better names. He got angry and replied, stop offending them. Then a bat flew up to the protagonist and said, by the way, Master Ryuto, one of the bats found the bandits' lair. Iris asked, Master Ryuto, did he let them go on purpose? He replied he was exposed. He found out that it was unlikely that they were all bandits. The bat shouted for them to follow her. Meanwhile, in the cave, the robbers were quickly packing their things, and Nick, putting things in a bag, shouted, "Quickly pack our things and leave. If the vampire finds them, he will finish them all off." One of the robbers agreed and added that they should take everything valuable and run. Suddenly they heard a familiar voice asking, "Weren't you waiting?" At the entrance to the cave stood MC and held Eerie in his arms. Then he continued so that they did not worry. He was not here to drink their blood. One of the robbers pulled out a spear forward and ran screaming, "Damn! Let him die." The protagonist waved his hand, and with his sharp claws cut the head off the shoulders of the robber. He raised his hand, from which blood was dripping, and said, "So, next." The robbers pressed themselves against the wall of the cave, and Nick waved his hands and screamed for him to stop and spare his life. They had no choice. If they did not rob people, they would die of hunger. The robbers supported him, screaming, for sure. They did not like doing this either. Let him take everything, but spare their lives. MC stamped his foot and asked, "Do they think they can buy themselves off?" He does not even want to hear their lies. They did not take their lives because they needed food. He cast a spell, blood. The robbers were puzzled, and he added that the blood had taken their lives. Blood clots began to absorb the robbers, who were drowning more and more in blood. They screamed, "What's going on?" Suddenly Nick, covered in blood, reached out to the protagonist and screamed, "Damn! The vampire hunters are coming for his soul." Then he fell to the ground. Eerie came up to him, examined him, and said, "Necrosis." Then she turned to the protagonist and said that he was a cold-blooded demon. He smiled and told her not to make a monster out of him. After that, they sat on the ground, opened the bags, and sorted out the wealth the robbers had taken. The protagonist said that he also had feelings, actually. She apologized and said that she was just joking so that he wouldn't be offended. He put the bag on his shoulders and said, "Okay." Then he asked if she was embarrassed by what she saw. Eerie was holding a bag of treasure in her hands and answered, "Not really. Everything is fine." They left the cave and continued on their way. She said, by the way, why did he talk to them as if he was so important and powerful? He looked much more like a vampire with them. He asked, why did he intimidate them, and added that it was time to return to the village. Meanwhile, he kept thinking about what Nick had said, that the vampire hunters would come for his soul. She asked, "What about him?" He answered, "Nothing." At that time, a crow was sitting on a tree and watching them. When they passed by, the crow took off and flew above the clouds. Then she saw a familiar silhouette. The girl stretched out her hand. The crow landed on her hand, and she asked, "Did you find it?" The girl thought about it and said, "It doesn't look like that same vampire. It's a pity." But she prepared for an attack and said menacingly, "Vampires should not exist. She must exterminate them all." 3 days had passed since his arrival in the village. The villagers immediately began planting potatoes. He himself went into the forest and decided to hunt animals. Eerie was busy cooking meat. She turned out to be good at it. Meanwhile, in the forest, some villagers were cutting down trees, and one of them called out, "Mr. Vampire, can you help with this tree?" MC swung his hand and easily cut down the tree. The villager said, "Mr. Vampire is amazing." The foreman shouted, "Get to work." The tree he cut down for them, they will carry on their own. The protagonist asked in surprise where such enthusiasm came from. Then he thought, but it seems that the locals got used to him pretty quickly, and they have been working since early morning. Then he saw out of the corner of his eye that the girl was hiding behind a tree, and thought, by the way, someone is bothering him here. Mel was hiding behind a tree and watching him. Not long before, her mother was kneeling in front of the girl, and Mel, with her hand outstretched to the side, shouted, "This is wrong. A vampire can't live in their village." Mom said, "Mel, but the bandits might attack again. A vampire can protect them from them." Mel stood there and thought that Mom and Dad were wrong. He was deceiving them all. Later, she went into the forest and thought she would expose him, the vampire. In the forest, they could hear him being thanked. Meanwhile, the villagers were busy laying boards, and one of them said, usually they were attacked by monsters when they tried to cut down the forest. The protagonist smiled, showed his fangs, and said that he was not worth thanking. Irie told him to stop showing his fangs. Mel saw MC standing with his arms folded, and Irie next to him. Mel said, "Irie, he must have scared her. She must save her." Then, she began to take something out of her bag and thought, that's why she brought this. Dried meat with a lot of garlic. Mel approached the protagonist. He asked, "What is it? Did she want something?" She became embarrassed, closed her eyes, handed him the dried meat and said, "Try it." He took the meat in his hands and thanked her. She looked at him and thought, great, now he will eat it and immediately weaken. The main character bit off a piece of meat and said, "Delicious," and thanked her. She was surprised and thought, what? Garlic was supposed to weaken him? He's an even bigger monster. Then she grabbed her skirt with her hands and said, "This is bad. We need to run before he realizes what she was trying to do." She said goodbye and ran away. Ryudo looked after her in surprise and thought, oh well. She stopped to rest and began to think, what should she do? Garlic didn't work at all. Apparently, it wouldn't work that easily. She thought that she was too naive, but she wasn't going to give up. The next day, the villagers were busy with construction. One of them shouted, "Mr. Vampire!" He was carrying logs on his shoulder and said that they were doing well. Then he lowered the logs to the ground. One of the villagers said that they were doing well with the foundation, but they still needed to strengthen it. Meanwhile, Mel was hiding behind the house and watching MC. MC opened the blood vessel and told him to try it. Then he started pouring the blood from the vessel onto the foundation. Mel held her hand to her chin and said in surprise, "Is he throwing his blood around?" Meanwhile, the protagonist cast a spell to harden the blood. The villagers looked on in surprise. One of them said that the soil had become solid. Another added that the foundation was ready. Another villager said that it was amazing, but MC, pleased with himself and stretching his hand out to the side, said that he could still make walls out of this. Then he saw several villagers discussing something heatedly. He turned to them and asked what was going on. One of them turned around and said that it was nothing. Eri said, "Mr. Ryuto, they are scared of the house made of blood. It is scary." The protagonist turned to her and asked in surprise, "What?" One of the villagers raised his hand to his mouth and noticed. She said that. He did not think about it. If he were a human, he wouldn't want to live in a house made of blood either. Then he added, "He will live in this house," apologized for butting in and ruining everything. One of the residents said, "No big deal." Mal peeked around the corner of the house and thought, "Damn vampire, he wants them to live in houses made of blood. But she's here. It will be dangerous, but she will challenge him. She will shove garlic in his mouth and then stab him with a silver fork." Mal walked towards him, holding the garlic and fork in her hands. He turned around, crouched down next to her, and asked, "Another gift?" Then he held out his hand to her. She gave him the garlic. She looked in surprise as he began to eat the garlic and thought, "What? He's going to eat it? Just like that?" Then his body began to glow. She thought, "He's angry. He's going to kill her." And she stabbed him in the back with a fork. Then she closed one eye and asked, "Does it hurt?" He picked her up and asked if she was okay. A bee was flying by and he said he thought it might sting her. She was surprised and asked if he was mad. The protagonist moved his hand away, smiled and asked what he had to be mad about. She just wanted to protect everyone from him, right? Then he added that she shouldn't worry, he wasn't going to hurt anyone. Then she started crying and wiping her tears with her hands. She apologized. He held her in his arms, walked down the street, and said he would take her home, just so she could show him the way. "Okay?" She said okay. Later they were standing near her house. He was leaving and waved his hand, saying goodbye. She waved back and said that the vampire was good, and thought as if she forgot something. MC walked down the street pleased with himself and thought, "That was great. He acted like a real big brother." The villagers passed by him and turned around. The man told her to look. She turned and agreed to look. The protagonist noticed this and wondered in surprise. What was going on? Why was everyone looking at him? He thought they would be afraid of him, but it seemed he was gaining popularity. Then he thought, it seemed like the coexistence of humans and vampires was just around the corner. Later, he returned to the construction site, stretched his arms up and said, "Okay, they will continue building the house." After a while, Eri came up to him. She was holding a blanket in her hands and said, "Welcome back." Then she asked why he had such a sly smile. "Finish the house and let's go to bed." He was surprised and asked, "Does she have her own house?" She replied, "She will still be next to him. She is too lazy to go home all the time." He was surprised and said that he did not understand her at all. She added, "By the way, something bothers her." The protagonist asked, "What is she talking about?" Eri continued, "He has a fork in his back. Does it hurt?" He turned around, saw the fork, and thought, is that why the villagers had such a reaction? Ryuto got angry, pulled out the fork and shouted, "Damn fork! He will find the owner and return the fork." Eri extended her hand and told him to give it to her. "It will be good for meat." He turned to her, holding a fork in his hands, and asked if she would use the fork that was stuck in his back for the meat. Has she gone crazy? Meanwhile, Mel remembered, raised her hands to her face and shouted, "Fork! He has been in the village for 2 weeks already. He began to live in a full-fledged house, but..." The protagonist lay and thought that he was sleeping in a coffin. By the way, he hasn't drunk blood for a long time. He probably should. Suddenly the lid opened roughly, and Irie said, "It's already morning. For him to get up, she's bored." He looked at her and said, "She won't even let him lie down?" Then he stood up and continued, "And stop living with him. Let her go home." She replied that she was already used to it. He added, "This is not an excuse at all." Meanwhile, the elder ran through the village and shouted, "Trouble! Tax collectors are heading to the village." MC shouted, "He does not have a second to rest." Then he asked, "Tax collectors?" The elder stood next to him and said, "They are going to collect taxes for this year." The protagonist added that he will have to figure it out. First, he wants to take a look at them so that they do not talk about him and meet them. The elder headed for the exit and agreed. Eri turned to him and asked, "Why would he hide?" He replied, "If this village really belonged to the Lord, then he would like to check something." Then he remembered the robber's words. They traded this village. And the words of the elder, the Lord ignored their request. He added, although the evidence is still circumstantial, he would like to know for sure. She answered, that's how. He snapped his fingers and suggested that he would change his appearance a little and turned into a bat. Then he flapped his wings and shouted that he loved this ability. She was very surprised. Meanwhile, he flew to the window and asked her to open the window. She began to open the window and repeated his words. He loved this ability. MC flew outside and saw the elder talking to the tax collectors. The elder said that they simply cannot give 80% of the harvest. Even if they give 60%, they will not be able to live. He flew above them, heard the elder's words and thought, right, this is too much. The basic tax is usually no more than 50%. At this time, the head of the tax collectors shouted at him to shut up. They can take it by force. The protagonist flew on and thought, so he checked. The Lord decided to take everything. Without him, this village will be plundered. He shouted at him to stop and turn back into a vampire. The chief tax collector was very surprised and asked, who is he? The protagonist answered, the new ruler of this village. He decided that he would rule here. The other tax collectors looked at him carefully, and one of them said, his fangs, is it a vampire? Another added in surprise, but the sun is shining in the sky. MC continued, so they will not pay taxes. The chief tax collector went to meet the protagonist and, pointing his finger at him, shouted, is he kidding? And commanded them to kill him. He replied, no jokes, he's not joking. It looks like they will not be able to negotiate. Then he closed his eyes and added, what a pity, and turned into a large dragon. Opening his mouth, he shouted for them to leave this village. And if not, the tax collectors ran away in fear. At this time, the chief tax collector shouted, he will kill them all. They screamed to be saved. After a while, the villagers and the elder approached him and he thanked him. Well, he said that he would protect them. Then he added, by the way, he would only take 30% of the tax. The villagers began to say, 30%? So little. Even the best lords take 40%. The protagonist continued, but they would have to pay taxes in blood. They got scared and backed away. He said, oh well, and added that they should go. After a while, Irie looked at him in surprise when he took out a vial and cast a spell to make the blood take shape. Then he showed a syringe and said that he would use it to take blood. He took Irie's hand, collected a whole syringe of blood from her, pulled the syringe forward and said that he would take this much blood from everyone once a week. Just give him the blood instead of the harvest, and he will protect them. The elder asked, Irie, is she okay? She raised her hand up and said that she was fine. One of the villagers said if that's all it takes, the other agreed. MC held the syringe with blood in his hands, closed his eyes in his hand and thought, pleased with himself, a blood tax looks good. It will also continue to promote the idea of coexistence. After a while, a girl ran up to him and shouted for him to free the civilians. Vampire. He spread his arms out to the side and shouted for her to calm down. He hadn't hurt anyone in this village. She kept shouting that she could see right through him. She would finish him off before he could do any more harm. Then she swung her sword, shouting that she would drive out the darkness. She slashed his chest with all her might, but he remained standing. She was very surprised and shouted, "What? Why didn't it work?" This sword was enchanted with holy magic. The protagonist put his hand on the wound, apologized and said, holy magic wouldn't work on him, and added, a powerful blow. An ordinary vampire would have been dead by now. She lowered the sword and shouted, this can't be. Then how could he do it? And she said, Holy Sun, she added, to dispel the great darkness, and let the gods' tears of joy flow, to protect the lives of their followers. Then she cast a spell, the sun that dispels the darkness. Then a large stream of light appeared. It was directed at the main character. He tried to hide from the sun, covered his face with his hand and shouted, what? She looked at him and shouted, this is holy magic. Even the highest-ranking vampire would not be able to stand on his feet here. Meanwhile, he crossed his arms and remained standing. She looked at him, was surprised and said, why him? She did not finish and fell to the floor. Then he held an open book in his hands and read, holy magic is able to take away life force. It is used in vampire hunting. Irie asked what kind of book it was. She wanted to ask everything. He closed the book and said, this is the diary of the previous owner. There are many useful things in it. He carefully prepared for the fulfillment of his wish. She asked, did he prepare in advance? MC agreed and said, is that right? Meanwhile, it dawned on him and he said, exactly. Then he looked at the girl lying down and said, considering how hard she wanted to protect humans, maybe she could play a key role in the coexistence of humans and vampires. Later, the girl woke up, started to get up and shouted, vampire, to get ready for battle. Then she asked where her sword was. The protagonist was holding her sword in his hands and asked, this one. She got angry and shouted, how can he hold a silver sword? Who is he? He introduced himself and said that he was a vampire that was different from the ones she usually met. Then he asked, who is she? She said that her name is Ariessa. MC asked, is she from the Vampire Hunter Guild? She agreed. Then he thought, the Vampire Hunter Guild. There was a lot written about them in the diary. It is an organization that is mired in corruption. They often justify their crimes by hunting vampires, burning villages, robbing ordinary people. Ariessa put her hand forward and shouted, "She is here to save innocent people," he thought. But she wants to save people. Apparently she is a person with a strong sense of justice. Okay, that's fine. The protagonist called her and asked if she could stay in their village. She was surprised by this offer. He continued, he is the local ruler and wants to achieve peaceful coexistence with the people. And he finally managed to start, and he did not want any evil vampire hunter to come. Also, she seems to be an experienced vampire hunter to him. He would like her to tell the other hunters that she's aiming for his head and that they have no business here. Of course, if she decides that he is evil, she can kill him. He said that he is returning the sword and returned it to her. She took the sword and said that she will stay in this village. But it is not to befriend him, it is to protect the villagers. When the time comes, she will cut off his head. Then she pointed her finger at Eri and said, "Is there a free house in the village?" Eri replied that her house was free and she could stay there. The rent was 1 gold piece per day. Ariessa was surprised by the price. MC told her not to be greedy. She wasn't using her house anyway, to name a normal price. Iris said that it couldn't be helped and suggested that she follow her. Ariessa went into the house, then turned around and said menacingly that vampires and humans can't coexist. She would cut off his head. The protagonist thought that he hoped that with her help, other vampire hunters wouldn't come here. Meanwhile, Irie returned and asked what he was trying to achieve. He was surprised so quickly. She asked again, so what was he trying to achieve? He replied that one day other vampires might appear here, and then he would like to have a strong person on the side of humans. Humans will start living together with predators right next to them after all. She will become a support for humans. Maybe they won't be so afraid. That's the role he wants to give her. She said his machinations again. He folded his arms and said that she was rude. Just one mistake and there would be no coexistence between humans and vampires. She replied that she was trying to think through all the options. Eerie understood everything and wished him luck. Meanwhile, in the Lord's estate, he was in his office and was furious, shouting, "What? Shanana village refused to pay taxes. They are now ruled by a vampire. A monster." Then he slammed his fist on the table and shouted, "How dare a vampire take his territory? This is simply unforgivable." The servant said, "They asked for help from the Vampire Hunters Guild." The Lord slammed his fist on the table again and shouted, "Damn." Then he spread his arms out to the sides and shouted, "They will charge them a ton of money for the job. No matter how strong the vampire is, they will overwhelm him with numbers." Then he stretched out his hand and ordered him to gather 1,000 soldiers. "Even a simple soldier can kill a vampire. They will exterminate him with their bodies." He continued, "Admit that the villagers are vampires too. They will exterminate everyone, burn everything to the ground. If the village burns down along with the vampire, he won't care." Meanwhile in the village, Ariessa wanted to attack the protagonist, swung her sword and shouted, "Take that." The blade of the sword flew past the protagonist's head. He dodged. Then he raised his leg and hit her hard on the leg. Ariessa fell from this blow and shouted, "He must be weakened by daylight." He replied, "It doesn't work on him. Even during the day he will be strong." She stood up and shouted, "This is just nonsense," and added that she will find his weak spot. Several days passed. She continued to attack him, and very often. He closed his eyes and thought today he wanted to finish measuring the fields, but she came. What an inopportune moment. Later one of the villagers called him Mr. Vampire. The first sprouts appeared where they planted potatoes. He was happy and shouted, "This is great news. He's leaving the potatoes for them, and when they harvest the first crop, they will have a feast." He closed his eyes and began to imagine delicious food. Later, Eri came up and said, "Mr. Ruto, there will be a meeting soon." He opened his eyes, turned around and said in surprise, "What? It's already so late." Then they went to the meeting, approached the villagers, and he said, at the first meeting he would like to choose a name for the village. The elder asked, "Our village was called Shanana. Does he want to change the name?" The protagonist added, "This way they will show that the ruler has changed." Then he raised his hand to his chin, thought for a moment, and said that he has a couple of ideas. At this time, Ariessa flew at him from behind with a scream, "Exorcism of the vampire." She swung her sword and shouted, "She must hit." MC turned around, stopped the sword with his hand and said for her to listen. He was already getting tired of this. Can he speak? Can she start looking for a more suitable time? Ariessa was surprised in response. Then he threw the sword hard. She fell with the sword, and he shouted that it hurt. The villagers looked at what was happening. Meanwhile, she stood up and looked at him with displeasure. The protagonist stood up and said seriously, "He is the ruler of this village, and his time is worth more than her time." She answered, "Her time is valuable too. She must quickly get rid of him, because somewhere else people can live in fear of vampires. But she can't abandon the locals." He said that he understands her desire to protect ordinary people, but this will not work anymore. Then he raised his hand up and added that he wants to establish rules. Exactly at noon they will have a duel. Every day, of course, she objected. Then he turned to the villagers and added that she should look, she was wasting not only his time. The elder said they could really work now, but she was taking up so much time. One of the villagers added, that's right, she was also interfering with other work in the village. Eri looked at her and said she was causing so much trouble. Literally a walking disaster. She was worse than a bloodsucker. Later, she knelt down, cried and said, what did she do? Then she asked for forgiveness. MC held out his hand and said that he thought everyone would forgive her and not hold a grudge. She looked at him with tear-stained eyes and shouted at him to remember her words. She would defeat him, every day a fair fight, so that he should prepare. Then she jumped up, took out a vessel and began to pour water on him and shouted for him to receive. Holy water. The protagonist covered himself with a cloak and shouted that she was an idiot. All his clothes would get wet. She shouted back that this was none of his business. Water must be his weakness. Why isn't it working? One of the villagers smiled and wished her luck. Another shouted he saw her drawing water from the well yesterday to make her holy. At that time, MC jumped up and shouted, damn, she's showing off too much. He started to attack her. She swung her sword. At that moment his foot was near her face. The blow made her fall to her knees. One of the villagers shouted, Mr. Vampire wins today. The villagers shouted, he's so strong. Mr. Ryuto is amazing. The girl waved her arms and shouted, Vampire, he's so cool. And the villagers turned and started to leave. One said, okay, let's get back to work. Another asked, I wonder who will win tomorrow. It's been a few days now, and they fight every day. For the villagers, it has become a form of entertainment. One of the villagers said, Mr. Ryuto, he hopes that he wins tomorrow too. He raised his hand, smiled and said that everything was fine with him, especially if the villagers liked it. Really, Arisa, he was a little sorry. He should apologize. He walked up to her, extended his hand and asked if she could stand up. Arisa didn't take his hand and rudely shouted at him to go away. She sat there, crying and saying why she couldn't beat him. She had promised that she would never lose to anyone. She had to become stronger. She had become stronger. Meanwhile, Ryuto said he didn't want to say it, but she had one clear weakness. He didn't have time to finish. At that time, an elder ran towards them, waving a stick and shouting, Lord, trouble, and a very big trouble. The protagonist asked what happened. He turned pale, his cane. The elder shouted back that a huge number of soldiers were approaching their village. Meanwhile, a large group of soldiers entered the village. The captain shouted, they got there. This is the very village. The vampire turned all the villagers into walking corpses. They need to kill them all. He stretched out his hand and shouted for them to burn the village to the ground, to slaughter everyone. They must prepare fire arrows, to aim at the houses. The soldiers with bows stood in a row, and he commanded them to shoot. At this time, MC appeared and said that he would not allow his village to be burned. The captain said in surprise, what? So it's him? The protagonist answered, that's right. The vampire they are looking for. Then he raised his cloak, put his hand on his chest and shouted, the lord of the village, Dracul. This village belongs to him now. He stood and looked at the soldiers and thought, their behavior. The soldiers exchanged fearful glances. The commander sat on his horse and shouted for them not to show weakness to the enemy. MC continued to think, their equipment. It looks like they recruited farmers as soldiers. Farmers can join the army if the harvest was poor. In order to survive the winter, they have to go to such lengths. Then he remembered Nick's words and thought that their village might not be the only one. It seemed that other villages were suffering too. He raised his hand to his chin and wondered what to do. Meanwhile, the captain said that he couldn't believe that he showed himself to them when the sun was still high. He replied, they came for his life, right? So let them shoot at him. Then he got angry and shouted, do they know how much effort they spent on building new houses? The soldiers were scared and shook. The commander shouted for them not to be afraid, for them to dip their arrows in holy water. He commanded, fire, death to the vampire. At that moment, many arrows flew into the vampire's body. The commander shouted joyfully, it worked. Vampires are no match for humans. MC abruptly flew away into the distance, then returned and covering himself with his cloak, held out their arrows in his hand and asked, so what? What next? Ariesa, Eri, and the soldiers were surprised. The captain shouted, damn it, kill the vampire at any cost. If the arrows don't work, pierce him with spears. Pour holy water on him. The soldiers asked in fear, what if he doesn't die from this attack either? The commander shouted for them not to be afraid. He must be a defense specialist, so he doesn't have a huge attack power. At this time, the protagonist jumped up and summoned a power, an explosion of energy, and covered the opponents with explosions. MC, smiling, asked how they could have such power. Then he came closer, stretched out his hand and said, soldiers, listen up. He plans to develop the Dracula village. A new country will start here, where vampires and humans can coexist. Right now, they must run and tell their families. In the meantime, he lets them go. The soldiers turned around and ran away. One of them shouted that he didn't want to die here. Another added, that's right, we must run. The captain shouted for them to stop, not to run away. They are damn deserters. The soldiers turned around. One of them said, if he wants to, then let him fight himself. The commander shouted after them that all their families would sit down. At that moment, the protagonist appeared behind the commander and cut off his head with one blow. Then he said he gave him a chance. It was his own fault for not running away. Irie came up to him and said that she did not think that he would kill him. MC replied that if he let him go, the innocent soldiers would be executed. Surely, almost all the soldiers were commoners from the villages. In addition, if he decided to kill the soldiers, he could take blood from them, but then the whole blood tax system would fall apart. This system is necessary for their coexistence. She looked at him in surprise and he asked, "What's wrong?" She took off the bandage from her second eye and asked, "Why is he so serious? He just wants to eat delicious food, right?" He closed his eyes and agreed. Then he raised his hand and told her to go away. He still had some cleaning to do. She turned around and walked away, pleased. After that, he turned around, saw the soldiers lying on the ground, was surprised and asked, "What are they still doing here?" He raised his hand to his chin, closed his eyes and said that he didn't want to kill them. They could have easily run away. Then he went up to one of them, looked into his eyes and asked why they weren't running away. Suddenly, Ariessa appeared behind him and shouted at him to stop. She would attack if he threatened them. She would still ignore the captain, but these were ordinary people. She wouldn't let him kill innocents. He raised his hands up and told her to relax, and he wasn't going to. At that moment, one of the soldiers shouted that it would be better for him to kill them. They had nowhere to return to anyway. There was almost no harvest this year. Even if they returned, they would die of hunger. The protagonist answered, of course. As he thought, they had no choice. One of the soldiers kept his fists on the ground and said, "That's right. They could only die or try to earn money in the army. If they died, their families would get paid." MC closed his eyes and thought, then pointed to the side and asked if they could live with them. The soldiers were surprised. The protagonist thought, the village's population will increase, there will be people to go hunting. In addition, more people will be able to work in the fields. He said they will accept them if they are willing to work. One of the soldiers said in fear, he will just drink all their blood. MC turned to the villagers and told the soldiers to take a closer look. They asked in surprise. "What?" He asked. "Why does everyone look so healthy? And there are many newly built houses here." He stretched out his hands in front of him and said that he is just ruling and does nothing bad. If they are still willing to die, maybe they should try to live with him. The soldiers fell to their knees and asked him to take care of them. Later, Ariella looked at him seriously and said, "He really didn't kill anyone." The protagonist replied, "He said he wouldn't kill?" She wanted him to change his mind? And why was she looking at him like that? She asked, "Changed his mind? So, he might still decide to kill them." He replied that he didn't say that, she just wanted to scare them. Then, waving his cloak, he told her to watch. He would deal with any conflict with minimal losses. She said, "If that's true, then." He shook his hands and said, "Something's wrong?" "What?" she added, in short, and thanked him. Then she turned around and walked away and shouted, "Are you happy?" He replied that he didn't ask her to talk about it. Irie, who was standing with the captain's horse, was watching what was happening and clarified that for a vampire, he doesn't understand women very well. He said in surprise, he told her to leave. "Where is this from?" "The captain's horse." She replied that she wanted to see with her own eyes how he would take a new step towards coexistence between vampires and humans. He smiled and said, "Excellent," so that she could watch him continue to make history. The first battle of the Dracula village ended here. Only one person died. After that, they began building houses for the new arrivals. They would work in the fields, which meant that he would have to work too. This battle marked a new beginning. People began to learn about their village and the country located to the north. Meanwhile, Lady Minalina sat on a chair in the castle and asked, "A village of humans ruled by a vampire? Is this true?" The servant replied that he thought this information could be trusted. She raised her hand to her lips and said thoughtfully, "Does he keep them in fear?" The servant disagreed and said that he occupied the position of a ruler. It did not seem like he was practicing tyranny. She added, if it was about existence, then it could be him. Then she continued, "He left and said that he would do something incredible." She was intrigued. The servant asked, would she go there? She said, of course. As a 1,000-year-old vampire, she could not help but appreciate his achievement. She was going there. The servant said, okay. He prepared a carriage for her. She said for him to stop. She did not say that she was going there right away. First, she should prepare something as a gift, and also for him to send him a letter. He said, okay. She thought, so ISEKAI'D, the dream he never gave up, will it come true? The dream of the coexistence of humans and vampires. Not long before, a little girl walked, crying among the corpses, calling, Daddy, Mommy, but they were all dead. Meanwhile, Sidil pointed her hand in her direction and said, wow, there are still survivors? She grabbed her by the face, lifted her up and said, it looks like she's the last one. Then she started squeezing her face hard, screaming, she's a beast. Arisa grabbed her hand hard with her hands. Sadal smiled contentedly and screamed, "She likes it. People's suffering before the inevitable end is always so beautiful. That's why she loves people." Suddenly a voice was heard screaming, "Vampire!" The archer ran to them and screamed, "The holy archer, Graganch, has arrived. He will not allow atrocities to be committed." She asked, "Who? What beautiful armor." Then she threw her on the ground and said, "It looks like someone strong has appeared. We will have to leave." Then she picked the girl up by the hair, looked into her eyes, their gazes met, and she said that her name is Sidil. Does she want to remember the name of the vampire who took everything from her? Then she turned around, flew away, and said goodbye. The archer asked, "Is she okay?" Then she woke up, raised her hand to her head, and thoughtfully said, "Was it a dream?" She fell asleep while preparing holy water. There was this dream again, but thanks to it, she always remembers why she fights vampires. Later, she thought that he should watch carefully. Today, he will definitely die. Vampires are the enemies of people. Later, the villagers, seeing her pouring water on herself from a bucket, screamed. She poured holy water on herself. She rushed to the breach. She pulled out a sword and began to attack the protagonist. A fight ensued. The protagonist asked, "Is she okay?" Then he turned to the villagers and said that they were done for today, so that they should get back to work. Then he asked why she only sees vampires as enemies. She is not one of those hunters who are in this business for the money. She constantly risks her life. Her stubbornness is already abnormal. She got angry and screamed, her mother, father, and brother. Everyone who lived in her village was killed by a vampire. He replied, "Well, he probably felt sorry." She shouted, "What is he talking about? It's all his fault. He took everything from her. Now he feels sorry for her? How does he even want to coexist with humans?" Arisa held out her hand and continued, "If he wants to show pity, then at least let him confess his sins." He replied that he has nothing to confess. She lowered her hands and rudely told him to go. "They are all the same." The protagonist replied, "I see. In that case, she needs to apologize to every local resident." She shouted that she doesn't understand. He continued, "Before she came, this village was attacked by human bandits. Some could not be saved." He showed the cemetery. "Therefore, as a representative of the human race, she must also take responsibility." She shouted, "They are completely different people. She did nothing." He replied, "That's right. It's all true. It's not her fault." And now, for her to remember what she told him. She looked at him in surprise. He continued, "He doesn't know anything about other vampires except those related to him, so she shouldn't try to compare them." Arisa asked in surprise, "What?" He added that he wasn't asking to be acknowledged right now. He apologized for speaking so bluntly. Then he threw her a vessel and told her to take it as an apology. She caught it, picked it up and asked, "Is it yellow?" "What is it?" The protagonist replied that it was his favorite thing. She got angry and yelled at him not to tell her that it was jelly made from human remains. He said it was honey. She asked in surprise, "Do vampires like honey?" He pointed towards the forest and said, "Yes, there is a beehive in the forest. They kindly share their honey with him." Then he waved his hand at her, said okay, and said goodbye to her. She yelled at him to stop. The protagonist ran further and further and yelled at her to try to catch up with him with her weak human legs. She held the honey in her hands and asked in surprise, "What's wrong with it?" And she thought, he doesn't attack people, even though he's a vampire. Her holy magic doesn't work on him, and he's too human. Sometimes she doesn't even understand what he's talking about. She decided that she shouldn't think like that. Vampires are still creatures created to harm people. She's doing what's right. Sometime later, the royal capital of Silvaria, the Silvaria Vampire Hunters Guild. The meeting was held in a large hall. One of the assessors said, "It looks like vampires really have settled there. Isn't this the land of the Lord who didn't pay them? Maybe we should just turn a blind eye to him." The other agreed. Mila crossed her arms and added, "It would even be more profitable for them. They would be able to show everyone the danger of vampires. They would collect more donations." Bill said, "This is a great opportunity to show that vampires are really dangerous. It would do them good." The other assessors also supported the conversation. One said, "And when the whole country has problems with this vampire, then they will enter the game, and the whole country will be in their debt. Maybe even get into politics." Another supported, "Good idea." He continued, "By the way, this vampire, he does not understand what kind of nonsense he is talking about coexistence." One added, "Just nonsense. Even if he succeeds, they will send our vampires there. They will create hell on earth." Then he added to send an order to the Silver Maiden that vampires cannot be killed. Bodoas asked to wait. Mark asked, "What's the matter, Bodoas?" He was indignant. He is against using vampires. He is against guild vampires in principle. Bill said that he is still too young. Mark added that they need to use everything they have. Mila said that he should not be so harmful. Bodoas chuckled something. Meanwhile, Bill smiled and said, "Then it is decided." He raised his glass and said that they should drink to their prosperity, to the bottom. Meanwhile, in the village, Iri said that she should listen, sister. She turned and looked at her. Iri continued, "Mal, really? A vampire, he is very good. Why is she trying to kill him? Ariessa looked into her eyes and said, what is she saying? A vampire cannot be good, he is a monster that drinks human blood. Eri answered, he protected their village and still does. With his arrival, the village has more food. The inhabitants became happier. Ariessa took her by the shoulders and began to shake her and continued, vampires are dangerous, they must all be exterminated. If nothing is done, then this village will be destroyed too. She folded her arms across her chest and clarified, when they were attacked by bandits, only a vampire protected them, and then helped to restore the village. Ariessa said, she's sure he is hiding something. Soon he will show his true nature. And at that moment she thought, all vampires are cunning deceivers. Then she said, he had already started drinking their blood. Meanwhile she thought, disgusting, evil. She answered, but he takes very little of their blood. Everyone is happy with such a small tax. The vampire is very kind. Arissa's thoughts, they destroyed her village. She got angry and screamed that there are no kind vampires in this world. Meanwhile, Eri ran away, turned around and screamed, sister. She hates her. Arissa watched her go, then sat down on the ground and thoughtfully said, damn, what is she doing? She bent her knees, laid her head on them and thought, if he is a vampire, he should attack people, drink their blood. They are all like that. All vampires are like that. Then she remembered. She needs to send a report to the guild, but she does not know what to write. Write to her that the local vampire is friends with humans? But she can't write that. No, she'll tell her everything. The guild will be able to make the right decision. She thought, after all, they were the ones who saved her from the vampires. A little later, Irie approached the protagonist and held an envelope in her hand and said, Mr. Ruto, a letter. He took the letter and thanked her. He began to read and at the same time said in surprise, what? Then he read it out loud. She's coming tonight. Get ready to meet her. They need to throw a feast. The protagonist asked, Eri, who is this letter from? She answered, the bats brought it. He added, so it's from a vampire. Then he stretched and said, but who is it? At least they should write the name. Well, we'll ignore the vampires. Eri made a paper airplane out of the letter and launched it out the open window. And then the sun set. She pointed her finger forward and told him to take a look. MC looked and saw a carriage rushing towards them. The servant braked and the carriage stopped. They hurried to the carriage and he said, what a spectacular entrance. The servant opened the door, extended his hand and said, they have arrived. She started to go down the steps and thanked him. Then she looked at the protagonist, smiled and said, good evening. Long time no see, or should I say, nice to meet you. She raised her hand and introduced herself. Her name is Minalina. I was a friend of his predecessor Cesar. The protagonist looked at her in surprise and said she. Minalina smiled and asked, so he finally recognized her? He answered, her name was mentioned in his diary many times, like they were best friends. She smiled, agreed with him and said that everything was correct. The protagonist continued, unfortunately, he inherited only part of Cesar's memories. Why was she here? She replied that she came to him, wanted to see who he had summoned, sacrificed his life. But the most important thing, she snapped her finger, and the servant immediately took a table, a chair and a vase of flowers from the carriage. She sat down on a chair and told him to satisfy her curiosity, to show her the special food they make in this village. He was surprised and thought, why is there a table here like in a 5-star restaurant? Then he said that she could have warned him. She replied that she sent him a letter. He asked again, a letter? Irie understood what they were talking about. He wondered, is this what they decided to ignore? Irie thought she made an airplane out of it. Although the atmosphere around her is very mysterious, she does not think that she is here with evil intentions. Suddenly, the protagonist heard a voice behind him, turned around, and saw Arius. She ran and shouted, Eri, don't go near her. It's Minalina, the purple light, one of the vampires who is rated as the highest rank by the guild. She turned around and said, wow. Then she continued, hey Cesar, that is, the one who looks like Cesar. MC replied, Ruto. Minalina asked, Ruto, why are there vampire hunters in his village? The Vampire Hunters Guild, there's nothing worse than them. Ariessa wanted to attack her and shouted menacingly that she wouldn't allow the guild to be slandered. Then, she began to draw her sword, but the protagonist pushed her away with his hand and told her to stop. Then, he blocked her with his body and said, Minalina, he trusts her. Ariessa was surprised and said, she didn't think he could afford it. Vampire hunters and vampires will never get along. He replied that he thought it was possible. For that, people should stop being so afraid of vampires. The protagonist held a diary in his hand and said, it was written in the diary too, this is the path to coexistence. Minalina looked at the diary, then closed her eyes and said, that's how, and added that they should bring her some food already. Ariessa looked and said nothing. MC said, there is no choice, and called Irie. She came, raised her hand to her temple and shouted, yes. Then she quickly left and came back with a tray. She put it down and said, here is the most delicious thing in their village. Special dishes of the Dracula village. 1. Black bread. 2. Blood jelly. 3. Forest honey. Eri raised 3 fingers and said that they only have 3 delicacies. MC pointed his hand in her direction and said, this is too much, quieter. We have 3 delicacies for now. And he added, over time there will be more dishes. She took the bread in her hands, said that she understood, and began to eat. Eri watched this and said, this is a bite. Minalina said, it is very dry, therefore very hard. Basically, it is an appetizer, it is better to dip it somewhere. Then she took a glass, took a sip, and said, something sweet. The protagonist said, this is honey from the forest nearby. Very tasty. Then she picked up a plate and said, this is unusual blood. MC added, they made jelly from blood. Then he looked at Irie and added, this is the manufacturer. She clarified that it was her blood. She tried it and said, I see. Then she thanked them for the food, wiped it with a napkin and added, and so, if you want to hear her opinion? Eri came closer and said, she will accept any assessment, even a harsh one. The protagonist said, although she says so, but Minalina stood up and said, in that case, so they should not complain. At that moment, she raised her hand forward and added that this food gets 30 points. By the way, it is thanks to honey, otherwise it would be 0. They were surprised and shouted, what? Then Eri fell to her knees and began to say, it can't be. Her blood should have been delicious. Minalina said that her blood is really delicious, but there is nothing special about it. She started to take out the vial and remarked, if she wanted to taste really tasty blood, this is what blood should be like. MC caught it and asked where she got it from. Blood? She suggested he just try it. He drank it, dropped the vial and thought, how delicious. A little salty and sweet at the same time. A very deep, rich taste. If the blood of the villagers is like meat on sale, then this blood is a branded premium steak. Minalina said, it belongs to a man she takes good care of. He eats 3 times a day and gets healthy sleep. To be honest, right now their village would not attract vampires. He was surprised and said, what? She added, although no, the most it attracts are vampires who can't hunt. He raised his hand and told her to stop. Even though they will be able to legally drink blood here, she replied. That's right. Then they turned. She pointed her hand towards the villagers and told him to look at them. The people of this village are skinny and don't seem appetizing to her at all. Well, yes, they only recently figured out the hunger problem. The protagonist thought, when did they manage to crawl out? She continued, most vampires would prefer not to drink their blood at all, but to go hunting in the cities. The locals' blood would be noticeably tastier. The protagonist raised his hand to his chin, thought for a moment and said, she was right. She raised her hand and continued, if he wants vampires to live in this village, then he first needs to improve the quality of the blood. He replied, it looks like he'll have to do that. Then he raised his fist and said, in any case, he wanted to make this village richer. But now there was another reason. MC smiled and thanked her. Minalina asked, did she help? And then wished him luck. Suddenly she added, but no matter how hard he tried, a vampire still wouldn't be able to live here. This is still a land that only brings them death. He looked at her in surprise. She continued, a vampire equal in strength to her or him will not feel anything, but weak vampires will weaken and die on this earth. MC crossed his arms and noted, but humans have lived here for quite a long time. She agreed and said that humans are not in danger here. But vampires cannot hunt here. Something is wrong here. Even she feels a little discomfort. Minalina put her hand to her chin and thoughtfully said, she can roughly understand where he is coming from. Then she pointed her hand into the distance. He looked closely and asked, what is there? He does not feel anything suspicious. Later, she pointed to the mountain and said, maybe it is this mountain. He grabbed his head and thought, so it is not surprising that he does not feel anything. And at the same moment he thought, he does not have the weaknesses of a vampire. He was angry that he did not feel discomfort. He could not find out what was wrong, and the lack of weakness ended up harming. Then he scratched his head and said, if only there was someone who could help him. He turned around, called her, apologized, but she looked at him questioningly. Meanwhile, Ariasa turned away and walked away. She thought, what is she even doing? Every day he defeats her, and now he said that he trusts her? A vampire who lives with people and does not harm the innocent. She thought that all vampires are monsters, but before she could understand, at that very second a note fell on her, thrown to her by a bat flying by. She read it and ran forward. At that time, Eri turned around, shouted, Ariasa, did something happen? Not waiting for an answer, she ran after her. At that time, Minalina grabbed the hem of her dress and shouted, God! She tore the dress. The protagonist answered, that's why he said not to go to the mountains in a dress. She rudely shouted at him to shut up. Besides, it was his fault that he was so useless and she had to help him. Then she added, and this wouldn't have happened if they had flown right away. It's all because of him. He apologized and added that he usually walked. She turned around, saw MC holding Eri in his arms and said, by the way, they were just like mother and child. Eri said that she had a very naughty son. The protagonist asked, so she was the mother? They ran on. Suddenly Minalina covered her mouth with her hand and said she felt something very unpleasant from there. Eri said, according to rumors, gold can be found in this mountain, but there are so many monsters there that people don't go there, and these are just rumors. Minalina replied, even if there is gold there, it doesn't harm vampires. MC was happy, clenched his fists and shouted, but at least we can sell it. He said that we need to start digging. Then he punched the stone wall, covering it with cracks. A strong wind arose from such a powerful blow. They covered themselves with their hands, and she said that he was a barbarian. Meanwhile, a part of the wall broke off. After that, everything calmed down, and she saw a small stone in front of her, picked it up and said in surprise, "This?" The main character asked, did she find something? She pointed her finger and said it burns, so it's a mountain of silver. She continued, silver? There's some gold in there too, to be exact. MC tossed a rock in his hand and said, I see. So the rumors were half true. She brought her hand to her lips and continued, she was told he has no weaknesses, but silver really can't affect him? She didn't even feel comfortable looking at him. Then she asked, can he use a holy weapon? At that moment, he took the holy sword, swung it, smiled, and shouted, anything is possible. Minalina looked at the mountain and said, if this entire mountain is filled with silver, then it can poison vampires even from this distance. Then she brought her finger to her chin and said, she thought it would be a difficult problem to deal with. The protagonist said, if you remembered correctly, silver would stop being poisonous if it was washed in blood. What if the water washed away the blood? She replied that if it was just regular water, then it was okay. For silver to become poisonous again, it had to be washed with holy water, not regular water. Then he put his hand to his chin and thought about it. She asked, what was he planning? At this point, he held his hand out in front of him and told her to just look. He closed his eyes and began to mentally list Dracula's village, his house, the vault, the vessel with blood. Then he raised his hands up and called for a rain of blood. She held out her hand and a drop fell on her. She asked, is this a rain of blood? The protagonist said, he turned the blood in his house into fog and then formed a cloud out of it. She said, I see. Then she asked, is this how he made the mountain non-poisonous to vampires? But if the blood goes where he doesn't want it to, the plants around it will wither. The protagonist turned to her and answered, it's okay. He controls the blood and where it falls, really, it's damn hard. She looked up and asked, with every drop of blood? Honestly, it's amazing. The blood rain stopped and she said that she no longer felt discomfort. The mountain was no longer poisonous. He raised his hands up and shouted joyfully, great. Wonderful. Now vampires can come to the village. Then he walked up to her, took her hands and thanked her. She pulled her hands out, turned around, started to walk away and said, no need for gratitude. She did it for herself and saw something interesting. Minalina walked on and thought, the blood rain, this can be used to fight hunters. This way you can neutralize their weapons. It will be easier to get rid of them. He followed her and thought that he shouldn't have shown her this. She turned around and asked, by the way, why did he decide to continue Caesar's case? Did he like him so much that he was ready to take on such a case? He replied that he saw his memories. Once upon a time in a tavern in a suburban town, Caesar stood behind the counter and thought, a boring city, and here only boring people. Then he saw a beautiful waitress and thought, maybe not. Caesar had his own unique way of hunting. He deceived girls and became closer to them, and then drank their blood little by little while they did not notice. He invited her for a walk after work. They were walking through the park. Suddenly she ran, and he thought, this is bad. Did she understand everything? She ran and waved a handkerchief, chasing away large crows. He looked at this in surprise. Then she ran behind the bushes and sat down on the ground. He came up and asked what was the matter. Caesar saw that a rabbit was lying next to her. She cried and said, poor thing, maybe we should bury it in the forest. He asked in surprise, why do this at all? A rabbit is just food. She disagreed and said, life is beautiful, and this applies not only to people. Even if he was destined to become her food, she should respect the fact that he came to their world. Later, they buried him. She sat near the rabbit's grave, and he looked at her and thought, strange girl. That day, Caesar did not drink her blood. And the next, and the next. She interested him. He wanted to know more about her. And one day during a dance, he told her to stay with him forever. He just wanted to live with her. Even though they were not together, he still decided to take a risk. He proposed to her. And then the wedding day came. Everyone was in the church. The priest held a cross in his hand and shouted. Finally, he showed his true nature. Dirty vampire. Caesar held his hand, which was burning. The priest took the veil from the bride and continued. There were rumors that he was a vampire. So he used the bride's veil. It had silver sewn into it. He wanted to become part of their society, and then eat them all from the inside. After all, vampires are the worst enemies of humans. She looked at him in surprise and said that she did not agree. Caesar walked, and the guest shouted after him, vampire. Hey, he's dangerous. We need to bring holy water. Why does he need a human girl? Suddenly, he grabbed her hand, picked her up and ran. The priest shouted after him to stop. Later, they stopped in the forest. She was sitting on the ground and said she guessed that he was a vampire. She even came to terms with it, was ready to continue living in ignorance. He extended his hand to her and thought, now run away with her to another city. No, she has a loving family here. Then he took his hand away and said, it was an impossible dream. She sat and cried, covering her face with her hands. He told her to go back to the city, let her say that he deceived her. He turned around and walked away, saying goodbye to her. She screamed, it would probably be better if he never met her. He quickly ran away and thought he did not regret that he met her. He was even ready to lose his fangs, to live with people. Why can't humans and vampires live together? Then he screamed that he wouldn't forgive this world, that it denied the existence of his feelings. He would change it. Later he thought their meeting wasn't a mistake. He would prove it. After that, MC thought, well, you could say he agreed with him. He understood him. Minalina looked at him and asked, so what happened? He answered, so she would forget. Then he thought, even though they were acquaintances, it was somehow wrong to talk about the past of the deceased. It would be better for him to remain silent. Suddenly Eri said, Ryuto, this is bad. Her evil eye noticed danger. He looked at her in surprise and said, what evil eye? He wanted to ask more. She answered, my right eye can see very far. He remembered how they met and said, is that why she found him? She agreed. Then he said, I see, and does she wear the bandage because she can't control her power? She answered, not because of that. Her eye is just dry. He said he understood. Minalina raised her finger up and said, if you think about it, that blood, she felt magical power in it. She looked at her and said how powerful her eye was. Irie agreed. Then she looked into the distance and said, vampires are going to attack the village. The protagonist shouted in surprise, what? Suddenly Ariessa ran forward. Later, she looked at the road and saw vampires sitting and shouted, him. He smiled and loudly introduced himself. Bird's strong hand, a high-ranking vampire who is wanted. Nice to meet you. He asked. She saw the order, right? Arisa said, an order from the guild. Then she took it out and began to read. Other vampires will attack the village and kill everyone there, so that she would leave from there. She shouted, what does this mean? Bird looked at the order and said, real. She herself can see the seal, it cannot be faked. She continued, no one could put it except the top of the guild. It's a special seal, strengthened by holy magic. But, Bird raised his hand and noticed, right now they are here on a mission from the guild. The order is proof of that. Then he told her to get out of the way, she is disturbing their dinner. Ariessa took out her sword, put it in front of him and said menacingly, he thinks that she will let him, a vampire, through, and she thought, this time her opponent is an ordinary vampire. He is strong, but holy magic will at least work on him. He held his head with his hand and said, he thinks that she will let him through. Does she care about this village? She said in surprise. What? Let's continue. A village where vampires and humans live together. She does not want to betray this village. She asked what he was saying. He moved his hand to the side and said that he read her report. Then he continued, everything will be blamed on the vampire who lives there. Rumors will spread, and people will never recognize the vampire as their friend again. In other words, vampires will remain the universal evil. That's what she wants, right? She looked at him and was angry. Bird stood up, walked towards her and added, if she goes against him, then it turns out she went against the guild. In other words, she will become a traitor. He continued for her to leave already. The village will be theirs. She saw everything in the order, right? Ariessa put away her sword and turned away. Bird smirked, how awesome. A vampire hunter obeyed his order. Then, he waved his hand and said, go ahead, they can only drink their blood. She stood and thought, is this really the best decision? She felt sorry for the villagers, but if they were sacrificed, then maybe more people will be saved from vampires in the future. This is the right choice. Justice cannot be wrong. Then she heard one of the vampires say, finally the hunters won't show up, he'll be able to enjoy the food. He thought it was right. Then he shouted that they should not let a single person escape and not waste food. Bird mentally agreed and said, that's right. We must suck them all dry. At that time, she, without thinking, swung her sword and cut off the head of one of the vampires. At that time, Bird heard some sound and asked, what is he saying? He turned and saw her and the headless corpse of a vampire next to him and screamed. She decided to stand in his way? She's going against the guild? She stood and thought. Bird is strong. She can feel it from the magical power in the air. The other vampires are weak, but there are many of them, and now is the night. This is the perfect time for them. Ariessa wiped her face with her hand and thought, most likely, she will not be able to win. But so be it. Then she screamed. She will not allow vampires who want to kill people to pass. She raised her hand to her chest and continued, otherwise she is not worthy of her name, Ariessa, the Silver Saint. Later, one of the vampires said that they had not agreed on this with her. Ariessa asked in surprise, with her? Bird turned and said, it doesn't matter. She swung and screamed, is he making a fool of himself? She would force him to open his mouth. She cast a spell. Sacred Sun, disperse the darkness. A bright light began to fall on the vampires. They tried to hide and screamed for her to remove her light. At this time, she attacked them with her sword. Then she concentrated all her strength in her hand, stretched it forward and screamed, sacred light, forward. And the light pierced the vampire through and through. One of the vampires screamed, "Fool!" Bird said that she asked for it. There are still more of them, even though she weakened them with her light. She thought, there really are many more of them, but even in the worst case, she can hold them back. Buy time. Ariessa mentally called the protagonist to be with her. Then she came to her senses and thought, what was she even thinking about? She decided to rely on a vampire? What nonsense. She would kill them all herself, and began to attack him. Bird spread his arms in different directions, then hit the ground. Then he stood up and shouted menacingly. His body became much heavier. Is it because of her light? She swung and shouted that he should not underestimate holy magic. Vampires are powerless in the face of light. He looked at her, grinned and said, only now, he knows how to fight her. Then he opened his mouth and red liquid poured out. She covered her face with her hand and asked, what is this? He said in a satisfied voice, human blood. She was surprised. He continued, she has a nasty power. Holy magic, silver and holy water, together, is a very powerful combination. That's why he weakened at least her silver. It should be easier that way. She thought, he knows how to fight her? Someone told him? Meanwhile, the vampires rushed to attack. One of them shouted to pounce on her, but they couldn't get close to her. A bright light was emanating from her. One of the vampires covered his face with his hands and screamed, even in blood she emits such light. Ariessa put her hand in her purse and thought, she can still use holy water. Bird held his head with his hand and said how difficult it is. She is trying so hard. Then he smiled and added, that's why he loves people. Ariessa asked, what? What did he just say? At that moment, she remembered the words of the vampire Seidel. People always resist until the very end. That's why she loves people. Suddenly, she received a strong blow to the stomach and fell. Bird raised his fist and said, it hurts him too, but it's okay. He will endure it and beat her to death. She tried to get up and thought, this is bad. She can't get up. This is the power. At this time, he lifted her by the scruff of the neck and said, he had never drunk the blood of a hunter before. Ariessa shouted for him to answer. Who told him about her? He replied, she would be very upset if she found out who it was. She continued, was it really the vampire behind them that didn't finish her off back then, Seidel? He leaned towards her face and said, well, what difference does it make to her anyway? She was going to die anyway. She concentrated and shouted, sacred light, shine like her wrath. Then she broke free from his hands, stood on the ground and said, she will protect this village and cannot lose. Then she thought, she will not let those events happen again. She crouched down, raised her hands to her face and shouted, sacred sun, use her life to drive out the darkness. Grant your blessing. She will not let them pass further. As long as she lives, they will not pass. She will protect the people even if she has to give her life. Then she said, no civilians will be harmed today. At that time, she heard a familiar voice calling her, sister. One of the vampires had his hand around Mel's throat. She turned around and shouted, no, Mal. The vampire said, enough. She will continue the spell and he will kill her. Suddenly, she received a strong blow from Bird and fell. Mel had tears flowing from her eyes and she screamed, sister. Bird grabbed Ares by the hair and asked, will they show her a beautiful show? Vampire hunter. This girl will see how the life leaves her eyes. Mal cried and screamed, no sister. Ares said, Mal, she can't do anything. Suddenly, one of the vampires received a strong blow. MC shouted, blow Ryudo. Bird turned around and asked, what? He saw a silhouette in front of him and asked in surprise, who is he? The protagonist turned around and said, he is the lord of the Dracula village, Lord Ryuto. Ariessa smiled and said that he is late, fool.